This is GPT Codex Pac Man. This one here is Gemini Pac Man. And here is Claude Opus Pac Man. In today's video, I'll be comparing all three to see which of these coding agents produce the best version. I will also share my experience working with each of them. Before we jump into the comparisons, let me quickly explain what I asked each AI to build. If you've seen my first two videos, you know I gave a detailed breakdown of how I built the game with GPT Codex Max. To keep things fair, I followed that exact same process for Gemini and Claude as well. Here is a quick recap of the method. And if you've already watched it before, feel free to skip ahead. The game was built in 7 phases, each guided by a separate prompt. In phase 1, I asked it to build the basic Pac Man game with neon cyberpunk visuals on a 20 by 20 canvas. I didn't spell out all the rules. I wanted to measure how well each coding agent knows the game. I also asked for smooth tile-based movement with input buffering using the WASD or arrow keys for controlling Pac Man. Plus, I asked for a HUD showing score, lives, and game states, all fitting neatly into a standard screen size. Phase 2 was for adding a second maze, plus a feature to generate random maps procedurally and save them. Phase 3 introduced 3 difficulty levels: easy, medium, and hard. Phase 4 was for sound effects and synthesized background music generated directly in the browser using the Web Audio API. In Phase 5, I asked it to polish the visuals with particle effects, pulsing power pellets, floating score text, depth wind screen effects, and subtle background animations. Phase 6 added an AI mode where Pac Man plays itself by loading an ONNX model. In my last video, I explained what this was all about, so check it out if you want to know more. Finally, Phase 7 added a Python script that trains a reinforcement learning model. This script also exports the trained model into the ONNX format for the web game. It also periodically shows a visual preview of the training, allowing me to watch it in real time. So here is the Codex Max version. Right away, you can see it nailed the neon cyberpunk style I was looking for. The maze is built using glowing tile segments, giving it a sleek cyberpunk look. At the very top, we have a HUD menu for displaying the score, number of lives, and game states. Below that are menus for the other features such as changing mazes, difficulty level, generating random mazes, pausing and starting the game, muting audio, and selecting the play mode. Below that, you will find the menu for loading the ONNX model. Now, once you start playing, most of the basics work as expected. You can move Pac Man around the maze, eating pellets as you go. 4 ghosts chase him, and if they catch him, you lose a life. When Pac Man eats a power pellet, the ghosts become frightened and avoid him. If you manage to eat them in this state, they respawn back in their pen. This part wasn't perfectly done though, because in the original Pac Man, the ghost returns as just a pair of eyes navigating back to their pen. I must say the visual polishing of the game looks pretty cool. There is a nice floating score effect when you eat pellets and power pellets, though not much beyond that. The sound design, however, wasn't great. There was no background music like I asked for, and the pellet eating sound was unpleasant at high volume. It actually was hurting my ears. And while the maze itself is playable and fun, it does deviate from the classic Pac Man layout. The original maze is more symmetrical and includes the famous wrap tunnel on the left and right sides, which are missing here. Now, Claude Opus created a main menu for selecting the maze, difficulty level, and saved mazes. The menu itself looks clean and visually appealing with a neon theme. One thing I didn't like though is that selecting a maze immediately loads the game screen. It made sense earlier on to implement the menu this way in Phase 2 when the menu was added for maze selection only. But once more features were added, a start button would have been the better choice. Now, once you are in the main game, you can see Claude really nailed the neon cyberpunk style. Honestly, I like this better than Codex version. The walls have that classic glowing tube light look, standing out against the black background, and the cyan and magenta colors pop beautifully. The HUD at the top fits into the game canvas and it has a nice arcade feel. GPT Codex Max HUD felt more like a software UI. Although Claude's arrangement is a bit tight and congested, overall I think it did a better job. It included the option to load the ONNX model, though I feel that feature belongs to the main menu. Unlike Codex, it didn't show the game state, but it did add a high score, which is a useful feature even though I hadn't asked for it. I like how it displays an instruction to press space to begin, right in the middle of the screen. This allows us to start when we are ready. Gameplay-wise, the basic works just like GPT Codex version, but Claude Opus improved on several details. For example, when you eat a ghost, it turns into a pair of eyes and navigates back to the ghost pen, just like the original Pac Man. Codex skipped that animation and simply placed the ghost back in the pen, so Claude nailed this part really well. The visual effects are also impressive. Like Codex, there are floating scores and effects when Pac Man eats pellets, power pellets, and frightened ghosts. But Claude adds more. It added a beautiful death animations and even a confetti shower when you complete a maze. Combined with strong sound effects and background music, the game feels much more alive. Claude also did a fantastic job with maze design. It's symmetrical and even includes the classic tunnel warps that let Pac Man exit one side and reappear on the other. Gemini also placed most of the game features into the main menu even more than Claude. It included options for selecting the maze, difficulty level, loading saved maps, and even a section for loading the ONNX model. I like that it provided some basic instructions at the bottom of the menu. It also added a separate action for starting the game. Overall, I think Gemini had the most practical menu of all three, though Claude's was more visually appealing. Now, once you press space to start, as indicated in the instructions, the game begins immediately, which I didn't like. Visually, Gemini's neon cyberpunk style had a nice glow on the maze walls with some light bleed and good contrast. However, I preferred Claude's color choices. Gemini's maze felt too monochromatic, relying only on cyan color. Like Claude Opus version, the HUD was integrated into the game canvas, which made it feel more like part of the game compared to GPT Codex software like UI. Still, I preferred Claude's HUD. Gemini's green score and live text, along with the flat red buttons, felt out of place and a bit dull. So for neon aesthetics and HUD design, Claude is the clear winner here, followed by Gemini, then Codex. Like the rest, gameplay rules were followed well. It handled the eating ghost states better than Codex, but not as well as Claude. The ghost didn't navigate through the maze when eating. Instead, they just floated back to the pen in dark grey color rather than as a pair of eyes. So for basic rules, Claude wins, Gemini comes second. In terms of visual effects, Gemini had floating scores for eating power pellets and frightened ghosts, but not for regular pellets. It lacked effects for completing a maze or when Pac Man dies. Like Claude, it synthesized background music. The sound effects were better than Codex, but not as lively as Claude's. So for visual polish and sound effects, Claude wins hands down, followed by Gemini. Now, its maze design was excellent. I like the continuous wall borders, and it implemented tunnel warps just like Claude. For maze design, I would call it a tie between Claude Opus and Gemini. But if I had to choose, I would lean towards Gemini. Now, let's look at the secondary maze and the random maze generator I asked for in Phase 2. GPT Codex Max managed to build a second maze which was nice in its own way. However, it lacked symmetry, placed pellets around the ghost pen, and had no tunnel wraps. and included wide corridors that made collecting pellets a bit frustrating. I hadn't specified exactly how the maze should be designed, so this was a good test of how well it could create something fun and well designed on its own. Claude's second maze looked far better. It felt like a solid alternative to the classic design, maintaining symmetry, including tunnel wraps, and avoiding dead ends that could trap Pac Man. Gemini's second maze also looked good. It kept symmetry and provided clear paths between sections, but some corridors had dead zones with no escape routes. So for the second maze, Claude takes the win, followed by Gemini, then Codex. Now for the random maze generator, Codex attempt ended up with scattered wall pieces and broken layouts. To be fair, that was partly due to poor prompting on my side. I was trying to fix a bug without providing the browser console error. So Codex wrongly assumed the issue was caused by a recursion bug. Claude's random maze generator was excellent. It did not aim for symmetry, but the mazes it produced were valid and avoided inaccessible pellets. It also included tunnel wraps. There were dead ends, but since I hadn't asked it to prevent them, that wasn't really a problem for me. Gemini's random maze generator worked too, and it included tunnel wraps. However, it sometimes created maze with trap pellets, and occasionally ghosts get stuck in enclosed rooms with no way out to chase Pac Man. So then once again, the clear winner here is Claude Opus followed by Gemini. When it came to the different difficulty levels, Codex didn't really feel that distinct. Playing on easy versus hard didn't make much of a difference. Claude, on the other hand, showed a clear gap. Hard mode was noticeably tougher than medium, and you could really feel the challenge. Gemini's difficulty level was also well implemented like Claude. It was challenging to play hard mode. So in this category, both Gemini and Claude tie for first place, followed by Codex. So overall, Claude delivered a Pac Man version that was exciting and genuinely fun to play. It combined beautiful designs with lovely visual effects and lively sound that made the game feel much more immersive. It also followed the game rules much better than the others. It also handled a number of smaller features well that I haven't even covered here. So for the web game, Claude Opus takes the win, followed by Gemini, and then Codex. When it came to the reinforcement learning training project in Phase 7, all three agents did an impressive job. The basic features worked similarly across them, but each had unique strengths worth highlighting. Codex Max delivered everything I asked for, and even added some useful CLI arguments to the Python training scripts that weren't included in the prompt. It could also render the training progress during execution, which was a nice touch. Claude Opus went even further. It provided a wider range of CLI arguments along with instructions for training on the graphics card using CUDA. Its visual representation of the training looked much cooler than Codex and was easy to follow, showing the scores, lives, and number of pellets eaten. On top of that, Claude's documentation was the most thorough and helpful for using the Python script. Gemini also performed well, but it didn't go beyond the CLI arguments specified in the prompt. One noticeable omission was the option to set the number of training episodes, which both Codex and Claude included. Whilst Gemini's visual representation of training was better than Codex, it lacked the extra details Claude provided, such as score, lives, and pellets eaten. So overall, Claude clearly scored highest for creating the training project, followed by Codex and finally Gemini. Now beyond the prompt, I went ahead and enhanced Gemini's training project myself, adding features from the others that were missing and improving the training strategy. With these upgrades, I was able to train a model that plays Maze 1 extremely well, winning the game many times. I also did the same for Claude Opus version, using a different training strategy, and it was also successful but not extremely good as Gemini. I plan to redo the training again using the same strategy I did for Gemini. I'm also yet to do this for GPT Codex Max version. Now, let's talk about how well each AI executed the phases. Here, I'm focusing on whether they got things right in one shot or whether it took multiple rounds of back and forth to get the task completed. Now, I'm not going to do this for all phases. I will do that for phase 1 since this was the most challenging for all of them. Claude Opus had the strongest first attempt. It nailed most of the core requirements immediately, such as the movement controls, pellet eating, power pellet effects, ghost chasing logic, and Pac Man's collision with walls. Even though only one ghost was actively chasing Pac Man while the others stayed back in their pen, Claude still managed to implement frightened ghost behavior, ghosts being eaten and returning to the pen as eyes, and Pac Man dying when caught, all on the very first try. The main issues were some odd behaviors at the warp ends, ghosts failing to escape their pen, and instructions being mixed up with the hard menu at the top. Gemini's first attempt was mixed between the others. Like Claude, it got the basics right: movement controls, pellet eating, power pellet effects, and frightened ghost behavior. They all worked. Tunnel warp also functioned correctly. However, none of the ghosts could leave their pen, which meant ghost AI and return to pen behavior couldn't be tested. Pac Man collisions with walls were inconsistent, sometimes causing him to get stuck or run into walls. There was also no option to restart the game. On the positive side, Gemini's wrap ends worked properly. Now, Codex Max struggled the most. On the first attempt, Pac Man's movement was broken. He only moved straight forward. Collisions didn't register, pellets could not be eaten, and whilst the ghosts moved, their collisions weren't respected. Because of these major issues, many features could not even be tested, making Codex's first attempt the least playable of the three. Now, when it comes to recovery and fixes, I will say Claude Opus stabilized quickly. Issues like ghosts being stuck in the pen were resolved with just a single prompt. Gemini and Codex Max also needed 1 or 2 prompts for basic fixes, but both struggled with getting ghosts to escape the pen. That feature took more than 3 prompts to make it finally work. So, for the overall verdict on the first attempt in phase 1, Claude Opus was the most efficient, completing most of the requirements in one shot and fixing issues quickly. Gemini was solid, but it needed more corrections, especially around ghost behavior. Codex Max struggled the most, requiring repeated reprompts and ultimately delivering the weakest first attempt. Now, finally, I would like to share my experience working with each coding agent. I initially planned to use all of them through the Visual Studio Code extension. However, with Gemini, I ran into persistent issues, so I switched over to the CLI instead. For all 3 agents, I used the basic subscription plans rather than the API, which usually cost around $20. Codex gave me the smoothest experience overall. It handled file changes seamlessly, and I rarely had problems with context management. In fact, at times, it felt like the context wasn't even growing. Codex was also the easiest to get started with, offering clear settings for model selection, context usage, and different agent modes that worked reliably. Claude Opus came next. I really liked the way Claude presented progress through the VS Code extension. It looked much better than Codex. However, it took me a while to figure out how to select the model I wanted, which was Opus. I also struggled to find context usage settings. I never actually discovered it. And at one point, it seems to pop up on its own. One big drawback with Claude was its smaller usage limits compared to the others. I hit those limits many times, which meant it took me longer to finish the game. I also ran out of context several times, which caused the session to compact. Gemini gave me the hardest time. I ran into repeated issues where it complained about high traffic and forcing me to retry several times. This made it impossible to finish the project in a single day. At some point, it also struggled with file edits, sometimes getting stuck in loops whilst trying to make changes. On the positive side, Gemini did handle context well, similar to Codex. When it came to handling complex tasks, Claude proved to be the most capable. It often got things right on the first try, and handle errors gracefully. Claude also produced the strongest overall architecture, followed by Gemini and then Codex. Codex surprised me by putting everything in a single file. When I asked why, it explained that this approach made debugging easier, which makes sense, but it isn't ideal for larger projects. So here's my overall assessment. All three agents were great, but I will use them for different purposes. For complex or serious projects, I will choose Claude. It does the heavy lifting, plans well, and executes complex tasks effectively. The only drawback is its usage limit. Upgrading to a higher plan would solve that, but with a pro plan, a project can take multiple days because of the usage limit. For less complicated projects or personal tools, I will go with Codex or Gemini if Claude's daily usage limit becomes restrictive or if cost is a concern. Otherwise, Claude will still be my first choice. Sometimes I like to use all three agents together, especially when I am brainstorming initial requirements for a new project. I begin with a minimal prompt and let each agent tackle it in its own way. This gives me different perspectives on the same idea, which I can refine into stronger requirements. Alright, so that's it for now. Next, I'll be reworking a more robust set of requirements for the Pac Man game and developing a more advanced workflow for coding with an AI agent. My plan is to turn this into a free course. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it.